Alright, I hate to do it, but my phone hasn't stopped blowing up in 2 days, so let's talk about Elon Musk and his claims about fighter jets, drones, and the F-35. If somehow it hasn't reached you yet, over this past weekend, Elon Musk stirred up a frenzy in the air power community with a handful of posts about the future of military aviation, claiming that crewed fighter jets are just a, quote, inefficient way to extend the range of missiles and bombs, and going on to say that it's laughably easy to shoot down fighter jets, including stealth ones, citing the war in Ukraine as proof of his position. Of course, Musk is entitled to his take just like anyone else, but because of the cult of personality that surrounds this business tycoon turned Washington insider, his positions on topics like this are soon mirrored by many who, like Musk, may only have a superficial understanding of the complexity of the air defense enterprise, the roles different platforms and systems play in combat operations, and the blurred lines between capabilities as they're spelled out on a sheet of paper and how they actually manifest on the battlefield. So let's talk about fighters, drones, stealth, and whether or not Musk is right that crewed fighter aircraft will soon be going the way of the dodo. I'm Alex Hollings, and this is Air Power. If you're anything like me, the only thing you'd like more than getting your hands on a piece of aviation history is to help bring that history to life for a new generation. So let's talk about how you can do both with today's sponsor, the Mark 1A Spitfire watch from Rec Watches. Now this isn't just any old watch, it's crafted from genuine aluminum that was pulled from the legendary Spitfire Mark 1A X4009, which flew in the Battle of Britain with ace fighter pilot Patterson Clarence Hughes at the stick. Each watch not only celebrates this incredible legacy, but it helps to fund the ongoing restoration of that X4009 aircraft. And when I say each watch is a piece of history, I mean it. Every one has unique marks and patina, so no two watches are alike, giving you a genuinely one-of-a-kind timepiece. These Swiss-made watches come with bold Arabic numbers, strong lume, and a design inspired by World War II pilot watches. So you can not only wear history, but you can look the part too. Now, I'm not kidding when I say I want one of these watches. In fact, I intend to order one myself, and the X4009 watches are exclusively available from RecWatches.com, and they're currently on pre-order with a 25% discount with shipments available in December. But fans of this channel can tack another 10% discount on top of that by following the link in the description below and using the code SAND, S-A-N-D, at checkout. Again, that's RecWatches.com and the discount code SAND. Visit Rec Watches today and wear some history on your wrist. On Sunday, Elon Musk shared a video of a coordinated drone swarm with the caption, "Meanwhile, some idiots are still building manned fighters like the F-35. Now this, as you might imagine, drew a great deal of attention, as, objectively speaking, small drones like the ones shown in the video are utterly incapable of performing the sorts of missions the F-35 was designed to fly. Musk soon addressed these critics in a follow-up post. Crewed fighter jets are an inefficient way to extend the range of missiles or drop bombs. A reusable drone can do so without all the overhead of a human pilot. And fighter jets will be shot down very quickly if the opposing force has sophisticated surface-to-air missiles or drones, as shown by the Russia-Ukraine conflict. Fighter jets do have the advantage of helping Air Force officers get laid. Drones are much less effective in this regard. Now, Musk is obviously kidding around here, but this isn't the first time he's come out against the idea of crewed fighters. All the way back in 2020, 4 years ago now, we had a similar conversation about his claim that the era of fighters was over and that remote-controlled fighters should be fielded to replace the F-35. At the time, we discussed what Musk got right about drone technology, but also what he got wrong, namely the idea that remote-controlled aircraft could be effective in air-to-air combat without concerns about signal integrity or latency. Instead, we argued that the only viable solution would be to outsource split-second decision-making to onboard AI systems that could take their cues from local pilots, something the Air Force has continued to develop ever since. But before we can really dive into this topic, we first have to address the multi-billion-dollar elephant in the room, which is Elon Musk himself, and how agreeing or disagreeing with the sentiments he relays in online posts or interviews is increasingly seen as an overtly political act, as the man in charge of SpaceX, Tesla, and X has brought his immense fortune and control over one of the world's largest social media platforms to bear in support of President Donald Trump's recent re-election campaign. But to be totally upfront with you guys, that's not really how I analyze these sorts of claims. And indeed, it's not even really how I see American politics. From my perspective, American politics aren't a battlefield at all, and are instead something of a team meeting for a dominant football program. The offensive and defensive coordinators will each tell you that victory can only be achieved by devoting all of your available resources to stacking their respective rosters, and outspoken players from each side of the ball will echo those sentiments of their coaches. But a good head coach can recognize the need to consider both perspectives and find an effective balance between them in order to win. When a head coach makes a decision, they aren't choosing sides, they're choosing solutions. It's important that we all learn to separate the position from the person and the person from the party. Neither political party has a monopoly on good ideas, or bad ones for that matter. And if America is to remain the dominant political, economic, and military power on the planet in the years ahead, it's going to have to learn to choose its good ideas a la carte, or choosing them individually instead of as a part of a collection that's been prescribed by our preferred team. So in reality, this isn't really a discussion about Elon Musk at all, because for all his fame and fortune, he's ultimately just another fallible human being like you and me. And as such, choosing to agree or disagree with Musk about something like drone warfare should not be predicated on whether or not you agree with his politics, but rather whether or not his position has real merit. We choose our good ideas a la carte around here. And while Musk's take on fighter aircraft is pretty divorced from the reality of today's battlefield, that isn't to say that there's no truth at all to what he has to say. So let's go over Musk's position piece by piece and assess each in terms of realism and value in modern conflict. Starting with that claim that crewed fighter jets are just an inefficient way to extend the range of missiles or drop bombs. And believe it or not, that argument dates all the way back to the Cold War, when people argued that the US should get rid of its entire strategic bomber fleets once newly fielded ICBMs could deliver nuclear weapons to targets without any risk to bomber crews. Of course, at that time, ICBM technology was not considered mature enough to be relied on alone without any other means of delivering nuclear weapons. Similar to the way artificial intelligence and autonomous drone system technology are not mature enough today to step in and replace crewed fighters en masse. And that's not just my position. In a recent op-ed penned by Air Force officers Lieutenant Colonel Shane Praisewater and Major Matthew Guertin for Breaking Defense, they echoed this very same sentiment, referring to modern multi-role fighters as stand-in forces capable of operating inside contested airspace, versus drones and long-range weapons that could be launched from standoff distances. I'll quote them now. Drones and other novel capabilities add to the complexity of modern warfare, but they are not a replacement for the capabilities enjoyed by a stand-in force ensuring even limited control of the air over a battlefield. Artificial intelligence-driven unmanned platforms are an intriguing option, but they have no history of battlefield success and are likely unavailable near term. The U.S. Air Force has attempted to start the transition to more unmanned platforms before, but seeking to define affordable mass in terms of lower risk is an inherent admission that stand-in benefits are still necessary. If the technology is not immediately available, the U.S. Air Force cannot afford to gamble its entire future on it. Now, this op-ed was actually published a few days before Musk's posts, but nonetheless serves as a pretty adequate response to several of his claims, namely in the way future-looking tech moguls like Musk can trade in maybes and probablys, but the DoD cannot. For Musk, it's a simple question of what's possible. But for the men and women tasked with actually fighting and winning the next large conflict, possible isn't nearly enough. They don't have the luxury of leaning back and saying, well, the technology will get there in a year or 2, or 5, or 10. They need the technology to be there, on the battlefield with them, because it's a matter of life or death. Today's most advanced AI systems for combat aircraft, being developed and tested by the Air Force Research Laboratory as part of the ongoing Skyborg program, still rely on human intervention in several ways, including having a human in the cockpit to choose specialized AI agents capable of performing different tasks. Because to date, no single AI agent is capable of managing everything a fighter aircraft may be tasked with doing. Specific agents can perform specific tasks, like air-to-air combat, but can't perform others, like air-to-ground operations or even landing. This will undeniably improve with time, but time is an issue if we're talking about designing new platforms around this capability that, as of today, is not ready for the fight, and when it is, will still require local human operators. And one would think that Musk, of all people, would understand this. After all, in October of this year, the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration opened a preliminary investigation into Tesla to determine whether or not they need to recall more than 2 million cars equipped with self-driving features after a series of crashes, one of which caused a fatality. And regardless of the outcome of this investigation, I am confident that Tesla's self-driving capabilities will continue to improve, but limitations nonetheless persist. And needless to say, flying actual combat operations inside fiercely contested airspace is a fair bit more complicated than your morning commute. Until these systems are robust and trustworthy enough to operate entirely on their own, you have to manage concerns about jamming and other means of electronic warfare that could interfere with the function of autonomous systems in a combat zone. This is not a problem that has been universally solved, and to highlight that, I'm going to quote my good friend, Sergeant First Class Ethan Long, who's a Patriot Air Defense System operator and instructor who's worked in developmental testing for new DoD programs. You may also know him as Habitual Line Crosser on YouTube and TikTok. According to Long, quote, Elon's hot take about the F-35 being replaced by drones is because he understands technology, but he doesn't understand tactics. Every single system the US employs can function without GPS signal because GPS jamming has become so common. We're seeing this on the battlefields of Ukraine. It's why Russia is using FPV drones that are guided by wire. And of course, there are other things beyond the technical limitations that we should consider. Things like if these drones are going to operate alone and untethered from human operators, as they would have to in a jammed environment, as Musk envisions, well then the American public will need to come to terms with the ethical implications of outsourcing the kill decision, or the decision to fire, to a machine. Now that's something that is currently against DoD regulations to do. But I'm not here to talk about ethical philosophy, I'm here to talk tech. And a swarm of quadcopters, like the ones in Musk's video, may be able to overwhelm, say, an enemy air defense array, but small drones of that sort are specifically designed to operate at low altitudes and short ranges. That's what allows for their compact form. Now that means needing to launch your drone swarm from inside, say, 20 to maybe 30 miles of your target in the best of conditions, using the latest and greatest quadcopter technology. And that would mean getting a launch platform into that sort of vicinity. Now that can be done via tactical aircraft, but at that point you're better off using a weapon that was designed to engage air defenses, like the new AAR-GM-ER, which could wipe out that same array from more than 100 miles out without the need to build a few hundred or maybe even 1,000 replacement quadcopters for every mission. So let's assume we're talking about larger drones that could offer similar capabilities to today's fighter aircraft. Now, designing an aircraft around autonomous technologies that are rapidly maturing but remain in their relative infancy today would represent an even bigger financial boondoggle than the F-35's acquisition, which saw its development costs climb because it was being designed to do things no other fighter had ever done before, and it was accomplishing that through the use of a variety of technologies that had never been fielded in a fighter before. The more cutting-edge and experimental a technology, the more risk-laden its path from development to production to operation. Because many of these technologies were not fully mature at the time, the F-35 program had to go back and make changes to the aircraft to accommodate issues and limitations as they arose, increasing costs and stretching out timelines. Developing a new fighter today comes with the same risks, and incorporating as yet unproven artificial intelligence into a fighter that's already designed to bring a laundry list of other emerging technologies to bear would only increase its complexity, its cost, and its development timeline. And I want to be clear that I'm not arguing that all that means we shouldn't do this. I'm just trying to provide a wake-up call to remind you that it isn't going to be cheaper than flying the jets we currently have. But to be fair to Musk, the technology will absolutely get there, and maybe even sooner than some think. But even then, there is no guarantee that these drones would actually be cheaper to operate in the near term. The reality of global military operations means there are countless variables that need to be considered alongside platform capability and cost per flight hour in order to determine what's actually the most efficient use of funds. The RQ-4 Global Hawk is an excellent example of how the transition to uncrewed aircraft does not necessarily come with a reduction in cost. This high-flying, remotely operated surveillance aircraft entered service more than 2 decades ago, and while it wasn't originally designed to replace the U-2, it has since repeatedly been touted as the Air Force's eventual replacement for it. But nearly 70 years after the Dragon Lady first started flying, it remains in service because, surprisingly to many, it's usually still cheaper to stuff a pilot in a spacesuit and send them up in the U-2 than it is to send a remotely operated RQ-4 to do the same job. Now that cost ratio has improved in the RQ-4's favor over the years, and the U-2 is now slated to retire in 2026, but that's still notably more than a quarter century into Global Hawk operations. The fact of the matter is, it takes a great deal of time and money to integrate new technologies and platforms into America's sprawling defense apparatus and warfighting strategy. And it's really only once that transition is completed that new technologies like these can begin to offer anything close to cost savings. The further the new technology or method of operations departs from existing infrastructure, training, procedure, or doctrine, the longer and more expensive that transition will be. Now again, this is not an argument against making these technological changes. In fact, I'm maybe the biggest proponent of deterrence through technology you're likely to ever come across, but it is nonetheless a reality you have to account for as a military planner. You can't just throw old systems, platforms, or practices away and start over with new ones. You need to keep your existing systems online as the new ones are fielded and the technology matures. That means having the infrastructure to support both legacy systems and emerging ones at the same time, including all the personnel required to build, operate, and maintain both. But while we're talking about dozens of aircraft in the case of the U-2 and RQ-4, we're talking about thousands of aircraft when it comes to fighters. The transition toward uncrewed fighters has genuinely already begun, with contracts already awarded for continued development on several collaborative combat aircraft, or CCAs, to fly fighter missions alongside crewed aircraft. But even some of these groundbreaking designs are being fielded with cockpits, so developers can focus on the complexities of fielding new fighter drones separate from the challenges of fielding AI control systems robust enough for the job, let alone capable of managing the testing regime it'll take to get there. At this stage, saying it would be more efficient to transition to uncrewed fighters would only be true if the US could just immediately divest its existing fleets of tactical aircraft and focus all of its time and resources on developing new AI-piloted jets with the assurance that there would be no threats America might need fighters to address in the meantime. That, of course, isn't realistic. And as such, the only path forward is to continue maturing these technologies towards service while simultaneously maintaining a high level of capability delivered through legacy platforms. Musk isn't wrong that drones will eventually be cheaper to build, buy, and operate. They just aren't today. At least not for the jobs we need fighters for, and they won't be for some time to come. But to Musk's credit, it is the general direction that we're headed. Now, beyond the question of fiscal efficiency, we also need to address the underlying assumption Musk's post makes about the role pilots play in combat when he says crewed fighter jets are an inefficient way to extend the range of missiles or drop bombs. A reusable drone can do so without all the overhead of a human pilot. In the right context, Musk is absolutely right that drones can be a cheaper way to deliver ordnance to a target than crewed fighters, and we can look to data collected over 2 decades of asymmetric conflict in the Middle East to substantiate his claim. But where his claim fails to embrace the nuances of reality is in the assertion that delivering ordnance to a set point in space is all that fighter pilots do. As my good friend and F-35 pilot Hazard Lee wrote in his book, The Art of Clear Thinking, quote, "Boiled down, a fighter pilot's job is to make decisions, thousands of them each flight, often with incomplete information and lives on the line." He later goes on to explain that, quote, "The flight must be executed under the fog and friction of war, where no matter how well a mission is planned, it will change. This means that despite the immense effort that is put into planning a mission, there will always be difficult decisions that need to be made in the air that haven't been anticipated or that don't have textbook answers." And while Hazard wasn't talking about AI, this actually speaks directly to the problem artificial intelligence has with absorbing the fighter role. AI is exceedingly good at completing straightforward tasks as they've been trained to manage, but face significant limitations when asked to make decisions outside of its prescribed training data set. And that, again, is not just my opinion. On October 7th of 2024, a team of researchers from Apple published a very dry-sounding paper called GSM Symbolic: Understanding the Limitations of Mathematical Reasoning in Large Language Models. Now, boring as that might sound, the paper not only highlighted the very real limitations of current state artificial intelligence, things that are often dismissed by AI geeks as short-sighted because the technology is sure to improve, but it goes on to posit that these limitations may actually be inherent to the systems themselves. Put simply, this team from Apple studied their own AI systems and then those of other top-tier competitors like OpenAI and Meta, and concluded that none of them are actually capable of performing genuine logical reasoning, and can only seemingly demonstrate reasoning by repeating steps they've previously been trained on. But more specific to our discussion, they also concluded that the addition of, quote, seemingly relevant but ultimately inconsequential information to questions posed resulted in substantial performance drops of up to 65% across all state-of-the-art models. To oversimplify their findings, this means that AI models are adept at answering complex math questions. But if you throw in some other information that isn't directly related to the question you want to solve, the chances that you're going to get the right answer drops by more than half. So if you tell it Johnny has 4 apples and Janie has 3, and then ask how many apples there are in total, it'll usually give you the correct response of 7 apples. We mistake this for reasoning. But in reality, the AI model has simply been trained on lots of questions just like that, and can easily replicate the steps it learned in training. If you were to add an extra, seemingly related data point that doesn't inform the final answer, however, like Johnny has 3 oranges too, it can throw a wrench into the works. I'm going to quote the conclusion of that paper. The high variance in large language model performance on different versions of the same question, their substantial drop in performance with a minor increase in difficulty, and their sensitivity to inconsequential information indicate that their reasoning is fragile. It may resemble sophisticated pattern matching more than true logical reasoning. We remind the reader that both GSM-8K and GSM Symbolic, tests they conducted, include relatively simple grade school math questions, requiring only basic arithmetic operations at each step. Hence, the current limitations of these models are likely to be more pronounced in more challenging mathematical benchmarks. Now, again, being a fighter pilot requires making split-second decisions over and over again, sometimes without complete information, and always with a glut of related but arguably inconsequential data pouring in from internal and external sensors on the aircraft. Effectively managing this fire hose of information, choosing where to place one's focus, and quickly coming up with novel solutions to problems you haven't seen before is the very foundation of a fighter pilot's training. But this sort of creative problem solving is outside the realm of what AI can reliably perform. That's not to say AI will never have the right answer, but when it comes to deciding when to launch a missile, drop a bomb, or evade a threat, getting it wrong once has significant implications. This means, as I stated earlier, that artificial intelligence can be extremely good, better than humans even, at executing specific and even some complex tasks, just as long as they're within the parameters of previous data and training. But when it comes to managing the complexity of a modern battle space, these systems will need to rely on human operators to give specific directives for a long time to come. Put simply, the further an AI drone is from an operator, the simpler its tasks will have to be. And having local human operators to provide directives without concerns about latency means having crewed aircraft in the battle space, flying alongside their AI-controlled wingmen. And while Musk is right that drones are a big part of the future of air power, he's just objectively wrong in assuming flesh and blood men and women won't be. But what about Musk's claim that fighter jets will be shot down very quickly by adversaries with advanced air defenses? Well, that's sort of half true, I guess, depending on your circumstances. Musk suggests that Ukraine has shown how vulnerable aircraft are to modern air defense systems, and indeed, air defenses are improving every day, but the conflict in Ukraine has largely been between two forces using similarly dated Soviet hardware. And despite Russia's use of more advanced and modern air defense systems, like the highly touted S-400 Triumph, Ukraine still has dated but operational MiG-29s, Su-27s, Su-24s, and more flying combat operations on a regular basis. The reality of air defense is, you guessed it, complex and nuanced, with even the best systems only capable of providing coverage for a set amount of area, only able to engage a set number of threats, and always operating under the impending threat of airstrike. If air defense really were as simple an enterprise as Musk claims, Russia would have secured air superiority over the entirety of Ukraine, which is only about the size of Texas and rests right on the Russian border at some point in the last 3 years of fighting. At the end of the day, defense is the sort of thing that everybody believes they could do better, just as long as they can trade in general statements and ignore the granular details of logistics and combat. But once you find yourself knee-deep in the complexities of warfare at scale, many of those seemingly insightful generalizations begin to sound pretty silly. When you're only aware of the broad strokes of a topic, solutions seem easy to come by. It's only when you've actually gotten your hands dirty that you begin to see the nuances and the challenges of implementing realistic solutions. So, is Elon Musk wrong that drones are the future of air warfare? Well, no, not entirely. They will certainly play a large and growing role in conflict in the decades ahead, but not in place of humans, but rather alongside them. Or, as my buddy Habitual Line Crosser put it, if the technology was a little further along, I wouldn't necessarily disagree with Elon Musk, but right now, we're not quite there. So as for now, we will always need an operator on the battlefield, in that aircraft, tank, APC, whatever. Let technology progress a little bit and we'll see where we're at. How about Musk's claim that drones can be a more efficient replacement for crewed fighters? In some mission sets, he's absolutely right, but objectively speaking, not in the more complex ones, at least not anytime soon. And as for Musk's claims that air defense is a simple matter that's rendered crewed fighters obsolete, and that even stealth fighters are easy to shoot down, well, that's probably his silliest take on this subject. No air defense system is infallible, and even if there were such a system, no nation on Earth could afford to build so many of them that they could blanket all of their airspace with it. The truth is, large-scale war is one of the most complex endeavors humanity has devised, and it grows more complicated every day. Scholars, engineers, and warfighters alike dedicate their lives to studying tactics and doctrine, developing new technologies or capabilities, and finding creative ways to win when even the odds seem stacked against them. Elon Musk is certainly capable of playing a role in that discourse, but his shower thought tweets aren't going to get the job done, and shouldn't be seen as anything more than what they are: the opinions of a bright guy with no actual experience in this field. Good ideas can come from anywhere or anyone, but in order to actually be good, they need to be actionable. Everything else is just a conversation. And with that ends yet another edition of Air Power from Sandboxx News. I'm Alex Hollings. Make sure to swing by sandboxnews.com today and every day for all the latest in news, entertainment, and motivation from all around the force. If you got anything out of today's video, make sure to click like and subscribe down below, and leave me a comment so I know what I should cover next. And of course, don't forget to tap on that bell icon so you never miss a drop from Sandboxx News.